To access Toolbox Final Data Validation Form, from the opening screen of the Toolbox, we want to click on Continuous or Meteorological Data Fast Track. We are done with this first button for now, and we're moving on to the second button, which is the Final Data Validation button. So I'm going to click on that to open up a new form. And this is the form you use to do the final data review process on the data that you have imported. And as you can see by these frames, the form is divided into 3 sections. There's the continuous pollutant section, which is the top frame here. Then there's the MET data, which is this bottom frame. And then to the right, there is a frame for PM filter data. And since this training is focused on continuous pollutant data and meteorological data, we're not going to talk about the PM filter section of the form. But just remember that the final data review process is similar for each of these 3 data types. And if you want to learn more about filter methods, consult the SOP. So each of these frames contains buttons and selection boxes. And I'm first going to start with the continuous section here, this first frame, because I am going to work on reviewing my ozone data first. So this here is just a label. So this is just telling me that this is the continuous monitoring pollutant data area. And it's telling me that I need to make a selection in each of the following categories. These are both, the yellow is a label. I will begin with selecting the site ID. I click on the drop down arrow and go to S46 because that is where my ozone monitor is located at. And then I'm going to click the sampler ID drop down arrow and I'm going to select my ozone sampler of IN03. Then I will select my pollutant of ozone and I will select my sampling year of 2013. And note that these are numbered, so you need to complete them in this order. So you always go left to right. So 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Notice also that after I selected a sampling year, my date time range is populated by the toolbox. And the toolbox does this by determining what data are available in the archive table for the site sampler, pollutant, and year you have selected. So since I've only imported one new import.txt file for ozone, the dates and times shown in that box correspond with my import. So I only have 8/8/2013 through 8/22/2013. I only have 2 weeks of data in my toolbox for ozone right now. However, if I had imported multiple 2013 ozone data files into the toolbox, the dates and the times would be the first date time in 2013 and the last date time in 2013 of the ozone data I had imported. So if you only wanted to review data for the most current import, so you only have a 2-week period you want to review, you need to change these dates to the dates that correspond with your import. Since in my case, these dates and times correspond with my import, and that's the dates and times I want, I'm going to leave them as is. And now I can review the selected data by using the buttons in this area. So I have got some options here of different buttons I can use to review my data. I can review the entire data set I selected, and that includes both flag data and not flag data, by clicking on this first button, View All Data and Manually Add Flags to Invalidate. I'm going to start with viewing only the qualified data. So if I want to do that, I would click on this View Only Qualified Data button, and that's only going to show me the flag data. So I'm going to try that and see what happens. So what this brings up is a query, and in the bottom left corner, you can see that there are 11 records that are flagged in this data set. Now, if I had not flagged any data in this data set, instead of a query window with data, I would get a message box indicating that there are not any flagged data. That's why you can only invalidate already flagged data with this button. You can see the flags in the qualifier field right here, and you can see this invalidation code column is blank for each of these records, indicating they have not been invalidated, and therefore will still show up in summary stats, charts, and AQS files. And note that there are sometimes multiple flags in the same row because invalid data is usually discovered by multiple checks. So sometimes you're going to see multiple flags, and that's totally okay. So I can't remember what each of these flags mean, So I'd like to take a look at the SOP and see the list of Toolbox flags. So I'm just going to make this a little smaller by clicking the Restore button. And then I'm going to click here for a help file and bring up the SOP. And now if I scroll through this SOP, on the last page, there's a list of flags that the Toolbox assigns. I had a L1Z flag for one of my points, and that means out of range 0 QC check. I know, yes, I do remember that. That was when I had that huge value for my 0, which was way out of specs. And then I remember seeing the R, so that was where I had my out of range concentration values. And then I also had an HD, which is high consecutive concentration differences. So those are the different flags that I have in my data that I learned about in the SOP. So I'm going to minimize my SOP and always have it open in the background just in case I need to consult it again. And now I see my query in the back here. So I'm going to just click in the query title bar and bring it to the front. So I'm going to start by looking at my first flagged value, and that's the value that was flagged because of my failing 0 QC check. And since the failing QC check makes me think that the concentration value is not valid, I'm going to go ahead and invalidate this particular concentration. So I can do that directly from this query, and all I need to do is click in the invalidation column of the row that contains the value that I want to invalidate. So in that case, this is the first row. So I click in that invalidation code column, and I click on the drop down arrow, and what that does is bring up a list of invalidation codes, also known as AQS null value codes. So let's take a look at that. And notice there's a vertical scroll bar here, and you can scroll through until you find the code that most describes why you want to invalidate the data. And note that for this invalidation code column, you can only assign one invalidation code. It's not like the qualifier column where you can assign multiple flags. You can only have one invalidation code, or also known as AQS null value codes, per row of data. So here, this looks good. It's poor quality assurance results. So I'm going to click on that to select it, and that adds the invalidation code of AS to the first value in my list of flagged values. So the next couple of flags for my records are HD15, and what that means is that the difference between the consecutive concentration values is greater than 15 parts per billion, and it would be a lot easier for me to review the data if I can see the data points around these flagged data that weren't flagged. So I want to look at both the flagged and the unflagged data. So I'm going to close this query for now by clicking on this X here. And I'm going to maximize this form again so my queries come out as being maximized. If you want to work on the form in the smaller version like this, that's totally fine too. It's just the queries are a little bit smaller. They don't take up the whole screen, and I like seeing the whole screen of my query. So now, instead of this View Only Qualified Data button, I'm going to click on View All Data and see what comes up. So this is my entire data set according to the range I selected on the form. And you'll notice that this query has the same structure as the other query, but the difference is that it shows all the data, including the flagged and the unflagged rows. So notice there's some rows that are not flagged, and that is because I clicked on this other query. So I'm going to review the rows around the HD15 flagged values to see how much of a difference there is between the values. And as I scroll through the data, the HD15 flags don't seem to be that wild. It doesn't look that crazy to me, but it sure would be nice to see the data in a graph to make sure. Now, the Toolbox has many chart options that are readily available to you. You just have to know where to find them. So I'm going to look at this data in graph format. And to do that, I need to go to a different form. So I'm going to first close this query window by clicking on the lower X. And now the data validation form is maximized, meaning it takes up the entire database window. And since I want to move to a different form, I need to make it smaller by clicking on the restore button. Remember, the restore button is this one that looks like two boxes on top of each other. And remember, you click on the lower restore button to just make the form smaller instead of making the entire database smaller. So now the form is smaller, and I could move it around and navigate when it's smaller like that. When it's bigger, you can't move it and navigate. So I'm just going to move it around a little bit, and now I can see the continuous and meteorological data form behind it. So I'm going to click anywhere in the blank blue area here to bring it to the front, and now I'm going to go into reports and charts. And even though this button comes after the final data validation button, you can work from the final data validation form while taking a quick sidetrack onto the reports and charts form. So I'm going to do that by clicking on this reports and charts button, and that opens up the reports and charts form. We are going to go over this form in more detail in the next module, but for now I just want to focus on the hourly concentration charts just to see if those HD 15 values were really that wild. So I'm going to begin by using the drop down arrows to select the relevant data in the boxes on the left side of the form, which are right here enclosed by this red frame. And notice that these selection boxes are very similar to those on the final data validation form. So I'm going to select my site of S46, my sampler of INO3, and my pollutant of ozone, and my sampling year of 2013. And the toolbox automatically fills in my date range. This might need to be adjusted if you have more than one data set imported into the toolbox. You need to adjust it for just the data that you want to look at. So now I'm going to click on chart hourly concentrations to get the chart. And also note that if you monitor and import met data at the site, charts showing concentration data versus met data might also be helpful in evaluating your data for validity. So these ones down here that say chart versus different met parameters might be helpful for you to look at as well when you're analyzing your data for validity. But I don't have my, well, I do have my met data, but I'm going to just stick with the hourly concentration report for now. So I'm going to click on that, and here you'll see this big negative 6999 value. So this is what I was saying, why it's really important to do the final data validation steps when you look at your charts. Because this chart is essentially meaningless to me because I can't see any variations up here because of this huge dive. So before I can look at this chart and understand it, I need to go ahead and invalidate these values that are causing this huge spike. So I'm going to close print preview, and that closes the chart. And I'm just going to make this a little smaller, and then I'm going to go back into my other form that's already open where I invalidate data. So I can easily go in there by just clicking in this blue area to bring it to the front. I could also just click in the title bar to bring it to the front, and then I'm going to maximize it. So the easiest way for me to quickly invalidate those negative 6999 values is to just go back into the view only qualified data button and open up that query that shows only the flag data, because I know I flagged those 6999 values, negative 6999. So here they are, and this is what's making my chart look really funky. So I am going to go ahead and use my mouse and put my cursor in the invalidation code field for that first negative 6999 value. Then I'm going to click on the drop down arrow and select the appropriate invalidation code from the list. I'm pretty sure this was some sort of machine malfunction, so that's the code I am going to select. So for the next value of negative 6999, I also want to use that same invalidation code, and there's actually a keyboard shortcut I can use to assign the same invalidation code to the next record. So I do that by clicking in the invalidation column of the next record, and then on my keyboard I press Control and apostrophe at the same time. Note that the apostrophe key is right to the left of the enter key on my keyboard. So when I do that, the toolbox copies the entry in the cell just above your cursor. So this only works on consecutive cells in the query. Like if I wanted to put the A in here, it wouldn't work because it would copy the value from the previous cell. And that cell is currently blank, so it would just put a blank value there. But since this one was right after this one, I can do that. So I'm going to press Control and apostrophe on my keyboard at the same time. And you'll see that that copied the value from the previous cell into this cell. So now both of those -6999 values have been flagged, and I can click on the lower X to close this query. And I'm going to put this form smaller since I want to go back to the reports and charts form. And now the reports and charts form is right in the back here. So I'm going to click on the title bar to bring that form to the front. And then I'm going to make it big by clicking on the maximize button. And now I'm going to run that report again and see how it looks. So the chart looks much better now. Those -699 values are not showing anymore because I invalidated those values. So they are no longer included in the reports and charts. And looking at this chart, I do not see anything erratic. The concentrations usually do vary during a 24-hour period based mostly on sunlight, and it looks like there is a smooth transition between the hourly concentrations. So I don't see anything really weird about those HD15 values. So I'm not going to invalidate those data because to me they seem like valid data. They fit in smoothly with the concentration on the hours before and after them. And note, just a little on this chart, here is also the gap where I invalidated the 699 values. So this shows where those values were in the chart. So I am done looking at this chart, so I can click on Close Print Preview. And I'm also done with this form, so I'm going to click on the Exit Form button to close that form, and that takes me back to the continuous and meteorological fast track form. And since I'm not going to invalidate those HD15 data points, I am completely done with the final data review process for my ozone data. So when I don't want to invalidate something, I just leave the invalidation codes blank. So let's just quickly look at that. So all of these are blank. So that means that I did not invalidate those data. The only thing left I need to do is write down in my database logbook what data I have invalidated. So I write in my database logbook that for the ozone data set spanning 8/8/2013 at 8 a.m. through 8/22/2013 at 7 a.m., I invalidated one record due to a failing QC0 check and two -699 ppb concentration values, but that I did not invalidate records with only a HD15 flag. And remember that recording in your logbook is very important so that you can justify your decisions in the future if these data are questioned. So I can close this query by clicking on the lower X, and that completes the final data validation steps for my ozone data.